question?
One at a time.
Explain the opening statement. Do an opening statement. Why are you here today?
Sure. Okay, so my name is Lorenzo Thione. I'm with Jay, one of the co-creators and producers of Allegiance. Allegiance is a new original Broadway musical, Broadway-bound musical, which has been in development for the last few years, and that stars, amongst others, George Takei, who's here with us, and Paul Nakauchi, as well as Lea Salonga, and an incredible other set of Asian American actors. The show is set to open next year at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego before heading to Broadway the following season. And it's an original story that deals with a chapter of American history that is very much untold and undiscovered, which is the internment of Japanese Americans during the end of World War II after Pearl Harbor. We are here to talk with people about this project, tell them about it, and sort of just be able to answer whatever questions about this project and its genesis and its importance in our minds for the American public and the world. Yes?
Yeah. At the last part of the previous panel, you mentioned that you're going to start with San Diego for the premiere, and then you're going to move to Broadway. And as LA residents, I'm just wondering, nothing wrong with San Diego, but I'm just wondering the omission of LA, Los Angeles premiere, and will Allegiance ever play in the LA County area?
So I can absolutely tell you that we are looking forward to a production that will open in Los Angeles, be it a touring production or a sit-down production in Los Angeles. Most shows, the vast majority of shows that are in development before they head to Broadway, they pick one market, one regional market to actually open and test the show before they can't go to Broadway. Once the show opens on Broadway, is reviewed and has an audience there, if, as we all hope, Allegiance is successful, many other productions will be born, and as well as touring production, which will touch Los Angeles, or a sit-down production like it has happened with shows like Wicked.
But we do have a strong Los Angeles connection, not only because of George's connection here, but our very first workshop production was held at the Japanese American National Museum in Tokyo in Los Angeles. And so, and we just had a screening there last night, so we have a lot of connections here in Los Angeles, and have been very welcomed by both the Japanese American community and the theater community here.
Any other questions?
Speechless.
Yeah. It's just that good. Well, might as well, can I ask
Sure,
one more?
sure.
Yeah. What has been the general reaction from the Japanese American community regarding Allegiance?
Do you want to check? Good question.
The internment has been the most destructive thing to happen to the Japanese American community. It fractured the community in many ways, and even divided many families. And so we tell that story very frankly, very forthrightly. And it was amazing for us to discover when we had screenings of the DVD of the readings that we had, how those fractures, which we thought had healed, still are very much alive. For example, the Japanese American Citizens League was very eager to be accepted by the rest of America, and they became the agents of cooperation with the internment, which turned another segment of the Japanese American community off on JACL. Those of you who may know something about the internment period, JACL people were called either jackals, JACL, Japanese American Citizens League. The initials JACL could be pronounced jackal when you pronounce that, or inu, the Japanese word for dog. And there were beatings, there were riots, there were violence, violent acts committed. families were divided by the loyalty questionnaire. So it was a very destructive event. And when we had these various readings and screenings of readings throughout the country, particularly on the West Coast, thank you, those fractures were reopened. So yes, indeed, it was something that has revealed some of the realities of 70 years ago today. In a few months, on February 19th, as a matter of fact, will mark the 70th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, signed by President Roosevelt, which ordered the imprisonment of Japanese Americans. So it's a very timely story, and certainly one told with the power of music as well as the force of the dramatic story.
It's been interesting. We've actually witnessed arguments break out in the hallways during intermission for issues that were settled decades ago, but in fact simmered in the community for some time. So this is not an easy story for me to tell because, you know, as Mr. Takei said, it really split families along lines of, we say, along allegiance lines. Where does your allegiance lie? With the country that imprisoned you, or and do you continue to serve it faithfully and when it itself has failed to live up to its own values? And so that's one of the questions that the community still hasn't completely come to grips with. And so even today, this show stirs up a lot of those old emotions, and you see arguments break out in the hallways. But it's good. I think the discussion is good.
If the show can revitalize and bring a debate and a dialogue that for years has just been tried to be swept under the rug, that will actually create more awareness, more understanding, and ultimately will increase the likelihood that as a nation and as a people we don't make the same mistakes again.
That discussion that this will stimulate, I think, will be a real contribution, because the internment was so painful, and the fracturing and the hate that was generated by that was so hurtful that many adults that experienced the internment never talked about it since then. And so the children of the survivors of the internment know very little about that aspect of the story. They know that their parents or their uncles or their grandparents were in prison, but they don't know the destructiveness of it. So this story, by approaching that issue forthrightly, will inform and educate a whole generation of Japanese Americans who know very little about the truth of internment. And that's the important, you know, this is important for all of America. As I said earlier, it was our Constitution that was violated. But it's also going to be a revelation for young Japanese Americans who know very little about the reality of what the internment did to their families.
Actually, in that same light, my question is, Mr. Takei, do people, do your family members, and actually for Mr. Nakauchi also, do members of your family openly talk about this? Have the years actually allowed them to talk about this, or is this still something that they don't wish to talk about?
Well, my parents are gone now, but I was very fortunate in the father I had, because he not only discussed it, but he was something of a philosopher, and he believed in the fundamental ideals of American democracy. He put it in that context in my discussions as a teenager with my father. And as I quoted him in the previous session, he said both the strength and the weakness of American democracy is in the fact that it is a true people's democracy. And it can be as great as the people can be, but it's also as fallible as people are. And the people failed the ideals of democracy during those hysterical times when racism and war hysteria swept the country. So I was very fortunate in that. But I've shared this with Lorenzo and Jay. The Japanese American National Museum has one gallery that deals with the internment story. And what I love to do is roam around the museum when it's kind of on the quiet side. And I came across a family group, an old man, a middle-aged man, and two young preteen boys, about 9 and 10 or 11. And they were going through that internment exhibit. And as it turned out, the kids were the grandchildren of the old man. They were saying, "Grandpa, you were there? Grandpa, how did you feel? Grandpa, what did you do about it?" And Grandpa was sharing his thoughts, his feelings with his grandchildren. And the middle-aged man, obviously the father of the boys, said, "Gee, Dad, I never knew that. Gee, Dad, you never told me that." Something that the old man couldn't share with his own son. Now with the passage of time, and to be in that setting of a very fine, handsome museum gallery, felt comfortable enough to share for the first time with his grandchildren something he had not shared with his own son. So that's been one of the legacies of the internment. The Japanese American generation that experienced the internment very infrequently shared the full story with their children.
Yeah, my parents, my parents talked about it, you know, but they never really, it was always just sort of factual, you know, they talked about events going into the camps and, you know, and I think what they left out a lot of times was how they felt about it, you know, what was really going on about, you know, because I think that was much harder to express, you know, the anger, the outrage, any kind of the resentment. And over the years, I think they suppressed a lot of that, and it just sort of became just into their sort of like memory. But what this show does is it allows the feelings to come out through the music, and I think that's the wonderful thing about the show, is that, you know, all the feelings that were suppressed by the Japanese Americans, you know, in this musical, through the music, it allows those feelings to come out, and you hear all these people weeping, you hear, you know, not just Japanese Americans, but you hear, you know, all these people connecting with the relevance of the story. And it has so much relevance in terms of not just Japanese Americans, but what is it to be an American in this country? Is it, you know, are you all continually identified with the country of your ethnic origin, you know? Or are we all Americans even in spite of, you know, what our countries of ethnic origin are? And this, you know, musical brings up that question, you know, and I think, so that's what many people will take out of it. So it's not just a Japanese American experience, it's a universal experience. And I think that's the most important thing about this musical, you know, because it's easy to sort of like just pinpoint and isolate one group of people, but the trick is to, you know, include everyone, so everyone can understand on a feeling human perspective, you know, what happened.
Any other questions?
Oh yes, I have one. I've been watching on YouTube that George has been doing a series of parodies of various musical clips. And my question is, would you be willing to do more of them again? And if so, which musicals would you love to parody?
Well, those parodies called Road to Broadway is essentially paving the road for Allegiance. We want to get the word out about Allegiance. And so, you know, there's Priscilla, queen of the desert.
So George really wants to be in drag.
Well, I did that already in Sister Act.
Sister Mary Teriyaki.
Sunset Boulevard.
You mean play the young writer?
I was thinking more of Norman Desmond.
So we haven't selected one yet, but yes, the road to Broadway is paved with many spoofs.
Yay.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether you see any parallels with the internment with kind of today, the treatment of Muslim Americans.
Yeah, I mean, even knowing ahead of time the story we were going to tell, of course, the fact that the story was so relevant with respect to things that this country had done, was getting close to have done, constantly on the fear and on the verge of potentially doing, but we don't want to sort of kind of hammer that on the head. It's not like we try to be cautionary or try to draw that peril. It's so poignant that we heard it from people seeing early versions of the show. This is so incredibly actual, and this it's a very, very important story to tell, because it will have the power, if nothing else, to sort of have this story be known and top of mind, even for people that may actually not know. You would be surprised how many people we have encountered along the way that actually did not know that America had imprisoned its own citizens because of the way they looked.
There's a moment in the show early on where, in an earlier version, it was the day of Pearl Harbor when the people are hearing it for the first time, and their entire lives change on a dime. Suddenly, you're the enemy. And
the day that changed everything.
Yeah, Muslim Americans who have seen the show come up and say, that's how I felt on 9/11. And so we understand that there's a historical context to this and a historical parallel that can be drawn to today, not only in that story, but also in the love story, and there's a forbidden love story between the young version of George, young Sam, and the daughter of the internment administrator, and who's white. And in 1942 in Wyoming, you could not intermarry if you were white. And so, the father says that this is against God's laws and man's. And people who are gay have seen that and said, and drawn a parallel to their own situation today.
And the mother is telling the daughter, just pretend these feelings aren't there, they'll go away.
Right.
Why would you make your life difficult for yourself?
So there are many moments in the show where you feel like the applicability of our modern questions remains. And that maybe we haven't learned as much as we should have from that experience, or maybe we're all still learning. And so we like to think that this show has a lot of current application to today's questions.
When 9/11 happened, Japanese Americans immediately knew what might be happening to Arab Americans. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Japanese American National Museum, and at that time in 2001, I was the chairman of the board. And we organized immediately a candlelight ceremony in the courtyard, in the plaza of the Japanese American National Museum. And we invited leaders of the Arab American community to join us. And because the museum happens to be 3 blocks away from City Hall, that candlelight ceremony turned into a candlelight march to City Hall and back. A little over a month after 9/11, we organized a symposium in the Great Hall of the Japanese American National Museum. And we invited a leader from the Japanese American community, an older leader who who remembered the experience as an adult, and a leader from the Arab American community. We had the executive director of the Human Relations Commission of the County of Los Angeles. We had the executive director of the ACLU, and we extended an invitation, or also the Sheriff's Department, and we extended an invitation to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to join us. The FBI was the only group to demur, but we had that symposium moderated by Kitty Feldy of the NPR station, and it was broadcast on NPR. We were very conscious of what might happen with to the Arab American community, and we organized to get that parallel story out as our effort to prevent the kind of wholesale political act that happened to Japanese Americans, and thank God it did not happen to Arab Americans, but there were an awful lot of, for example, the mosque issue near Ground Zero. I mean, that was a completely hysterical, racist reaction there. So we need to continue to keep reminding America at times of great stress like that, how fallible we can be, and to try to temper that as we can. And certainly with Allegiance, we will be contributing to that effort.
Along the same lines of parallels between then and now, do you think with all we've learned and with how easy information is available with with the internet now, do you think the internment is something America is capable of doing again? Do you think people would stand by and let that happen a second time? I
would hope not, but you don't know what kind of event might happen. I'm not a foreseer of the future, but I am hopeful that we have learned, and certainly with after 9/11, there was no wholesale roundup and imprisonment of Arab Americans. There were certain leaders that were taken away, and their families knew nothing about where the father was taken, why he was taken, and 8 months later he came back. So yes, something like that has happened after 9/11. So it's very difficult to predict what might be happening.
And certainly, there have been challenges to whether or not there have been violation of due process rights towards people that were detained throughout that period of time. But ultimately, what's certainly something that we've experienced is that even today, even with the sort of exchange of information and ease, sort of theoretical ease for these stories to be known, there still are an awful lot of people that don't even know that Japanese Americans were interned. As a matter of fact, in our early presentations, there were cast members who got the script from their agents and asked us, did this really happen? What happened? So it's actually, to some extent, California is one of the areas that sort of has the least of this problem. It's part of our curriculum in schools and so on. But it is, as George often mentions, as you move east of the Rockies, there's actually a lot of people that have never heard the story. And to the extent that they have heard it, they've heard a very simplified, very sort of, neutral version of it. And I think, we have the opportunity with a show that tells a moving, compelling story that stirs people's emotion to make this chapter of American history be top of mind for people, and ultimately it will be a service.
I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about why some of the other aspects of World War II have been covered in media, especially in the past 20 or 30 years, but the internment issue hasn't really been talked about in movies or TV shows nearly as much as other aspects.
I can answer that to some extent. I think that this has been a difficult thing for Japanese Americans to discuss openly, and a lot of the stories have remained internal or unspoken. And part of it is because there's a lot of shame involved with the families when they were relocated, and they didn't want to dig up these old memories. And it isn't really until the Sansei, the third generation, that began asking a lot of questions that the older generations began to speak more openly. Also, a lot of these folks are in the twilight of their lives and are starting to realize that the story is an important one. And especially after 9/11, when they see that America can get hysterical again, I think that they see that there is a responsibility to make sure that we don't repeat these mistakes. And so often it takes sort of an outside look at a story to bring it to life. There have been in the past a couple of movies and a few books that have made it, but never has this story been told, certainly on the Broadway stage. And we feel that it's the appropriate place to tell it because of the epic sweep of the story, the stakes that are involved, and just the historical nature of it. I'm not Japanese American, I'm Chinese American, but I consider
Nor am I.
But I spent I'm a lawyer by training, and I spent my early years fighting for civil rights for Asian Americans, founding the Asian Law Journal, and doing things that, among Asian Americans, and the story of the internment has always been the most important civil rights question that Asian Americans have had to face. At the same time, we're still learning new things even about that story. Just a few months ago, the Solicitor General of the United States confessed that Army reports, Navy reports were buried and not presented to the Supreme Court when they heard the Korematsu case, and they had to apologize that all the stuff, that key evidence which should have been presented, which could have exonerated the defendant, was actually hidden by the Navy and buried. And so this stuff is we're still learning today of the mistakes of the past, and the story's not done, far from it. That's why we have these arguments occurring in the hallways. That's why just last week, or a few days ago, Congress awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor to 300 members of the
gold medal.
The gold medal, yeah. The gold medal to survivors of the 442nd and 100th Battalion. So I think it's the right time for this story. I think that America has now matured to a point where the story can be told, and we can look back with honesty on these questions, and without political agenda, just looking for the truth, looking for human truth in the story. And so I think I'm very honored now that we have an opportunity to tell it.
Yeah, and there certainly have been other chapters of American history that were shameful, that have been dealt with in the arts and the movies and so on. And I think partly of your question about why not this part, and why, with how much has been World War II, certainly part of that. There's like Jay said, America is maturing to that point, but there's a lot of romantic rhetoric about World War II that is that moment in which America sort of stood up for, the world's freedom, and it's been hard for us as a nation to actually take a step back and say, during that period when we were actually calling ourselves the liberators of the world, we were actually taking our own citizens and putting them in camps.
Just for the record, in answer to your question, in 1948 there was a movie done by MGM called Go for Broke, which is the motto of the 442nd. That movie starred Van Johnson. So that already gives you an idea of how it was treated. I did a movie in 1958 called From Hell to Eternity with Jeffrey Hunter and David Jansen and Vic Damone. And that dealt with the internment in a brief scene. And on television, the novel by Jane Wakatsuki Houston titled Farewell to Manzanar was dramatized. But there were very few stories of the internment in movies and television.
Actually, a question for Jay. For those who are unfamiliar with the Fred Korematsu case, could you explain that?
Well, the Korematsu case was actually a series of cases, and they culminated in the Korematsu decision, which called to question whether Executive Order 9066 was itself unconstitutional, whether it was an unconstitutional extension of the executive power to round up citizens without due process in the name of defending the security of the nation. And it's a travesty in American jurisprudence because the Supreme Court held that the military had a rational basis for its actions, and basically ceded to the military the right to trample upon the constitutional guarantees of a people. And since then, it's interesting. One of the Supreme Court has an interesting checkered past with the whole internment question. One of the chief proponents of the internment in California was actually Earl Warren, who became the liberal Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren. But during his time as Attorney General in California, he was calling upon the Japanese to be rounded up. And I think that experience, that he personally felt a lot of guilt over that experience, and that probably drove him to some of his more liberal decisions later. But the Korematsu case has stood sort of as a blight upon our whole legal system, and if the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, can agree that yes, it says you have these rights, but asterisk, not if the military says no. If that's the limit of what our Constitution is, then we have no true freedom. At any moment in time, that we could become a dictatorship ruled by our military or by one executive branch, and that's not how our society is structured. But the Supreme Court got it wrong. At least they're now acknowledging we got it wrong. That was wrong. We shouldn't have done that. But at the time, it was a huge setback for civil rights, and it's caused a lot of people to question the fundamental basis of our democracy and what the role of the judiciary should be. You know, they call them rights, to quote Rachel Maddow, they call them rights because they're not supposed to be voted away. And so, to me, you know, getting a chance to work on a show like Allegiance, which highlights in a very dramatic way how these rights were trampled upon, it's truly a privilege, and to work with the great George Takei, who has spent his whole life sort of trying to inform America and inform our democracy on what went wrong and how we can prevent that from happening again. It's truly been an honor.
For full disclosure, I should tell you that as well as being a brilliant composer lyricist, Jay is still today a practicing attorney.
Talk.
Yeah, and write briefs as well.
So if nobody has any more questions? Last one.
Ultimately, what is the message that you hope America will get from your show? Well, everyone can answer.
Sure. It's and honestly, a story that moves people has to speak to an audience on many levels, and there are many stories within Allegiance. And we've spent a lot of time today talking about the important message that sort of lies in the fact that the story of Allegiance deals with the story of the Japanese-American internment. But as I hope you will see when you actually get to see the show, it actually tells the story of a family and their struggles as they diverge and they differ in their opinions and their views of the world, and they try to get each other to see sort of the way that they're seeing the world. And because of these stubbornness, and because of the mistakes they made, they drift apart. And it's the story of the opportunity that life gives you sometimes to make a wrong right and to fix a mistake that has been haunting you for a long time. Because if you let life give you and take that second opportunity, that second chance, then you can live the rest of your life happy and making peace. And that's ultimately actually the message that the story and the show carries, and that's why it's so moving and so important to so many people that have seen it.
Thank you very much, everybody.